the gentleman of bottled miracles. In the untamed sprawl of the American West, where justice traveled slower than the stagecoach and truth was an optional luxury, there thrived a very particular breed of man. He was not a gunslinger, though he carried words like bullets. He was not a preacher, though he promised salvation in liquid form. He was a physician only in the sense that he could pronounce the word phlebitis without choking on it. This species was known by many names: traveling medicine man, miracle monger, doctor of progress, but most often, and most accurately, as snake oil salesman. Now, the snake oil salesman was a figure as common as tumbleweeds and as slippery as the oil he peddled. His profession was simple in principle, if not in practice. Take a bottle of colored water, add a pinch of turpentine or molasses for credibility, slap a label with more words than truth, and sell it at a price that could buy a decent horse. The genius of it was that the cure itself didn't matter. The sickness of the human condition did all the work. Men ached in their joints, women longed for vigor, preachers coughed up blood, widows whispered about rheumatism and bad luck, all of them desperately willing to believe that salvation could be corked inside a glass bottle. And for a few silver coins, our hero would gladly provide them the privilege of belief. Enter Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift. Doctor, of course, being a title he had bestowed upon himself after overhearing it applied to a horse surgeon in Kansas and deciding it lent an irresistible air of authority. Dr. Grift was a tall, angular fellow, as if someone had taken a scarecrow and taught it how to smile with too many teeth. His clothes were always a touch too fine for the dust-choked towns he visited. A long coat that trailed like theater curtains, a top hat that demanded respect, and a pocket watch that ticked loudly but hadn't kept proper time since the Buchanan administration. He was, in short, a man of distinction, or at least of distinction loudly proclaimed. And what he carried in his squeaky-wheeled wagon was nothing less than bottled miracles, Dr. Grift's universal elixir of life. Universal because it claimed to cure everything. Elixir because that sounded far nobler than liquid guesswork. And life because he had found that nobody wanted to buy Dr. Grift's slight improvement in general discomfort. The recipe was his proudest secret, refined over years of professional dishonesty. Each bottle contained 2 parts water, preferably from a stream no one had peed in recently. 1 part grain alcohol, to ensure the patient felt something after drinking, a dash of molasses, to stick to the tongue and the imagination, and, if feeling ambitious, a shaving of ginger root to simulate medicinal credibility. He swore up and down that it cured gout, lumbago, consumptive cough, broken hearts, bad marriages, stubborn crops, and even mental deficiency. The last claim, naturally, was its best advertisement. Dr. Grift did not sell bottles. He sold hope, in a world where bullets and whiskey had become the only other dependable medicines. He sold the grand idea that progress was arriving, that science had already conquered suffering, and that all of it came conveniently labeled in his wagon at 50 cents a cure. And so, with his banner flapping against the prairie winds, his horse sighing in resignation, and his hat tipped at a jaunty angle of deception, Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift rolled his wagon toward the next unsuspecting town. After all, the West was wide, and foolishness was its most renewable resource. Dustwood did not so much announce itself as apologize for existing. It had grown around a well that coughed up more sand than water and clung to the idea of prosperity the way a tick clings to a long-suffering hound. A few buildings tried to look respectable. The saloon with its peeling gilt letters, the general store listing like a drunk sailor, the jail door hung crooked. But mostly Dustwood was wood, dust, and the size of people waiting for a miracle that never bothered to stop. A thin line appeared on the horizon, the shape of a wagon dragging its shadow behind like a guilty conscience. A horse hauled the contraption with the slow endurance of something that knew better. Above it flapped a banner that had once been red and bold, now sunbitten to a color best described as optimistic pink. It read, "Wonders of Science and Spirit, DRBP Grift's Universal Elixir." The wagon creaked into town at the pace of a man who knew that delay was an ingredient in desire. A crowd forms faster when there is time to wonder if one should form at all. Children noticed first, they always do, sprinting toward the square with the air of licensed chaos. Then came the men from the saloon doorway, elbows out, spurs whispering. Women drifted from porches, wiping hands on aprons, not about to admit curiosity, but unwilling to be absent. The sheriff emerged at a dignified crawl that suggested any trouble would have to meet him halfway and take a rest besides. Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift stood up before the wagon stopped, as if the town square existed expressly to receive him. He tipped his hat from atop his thin frame with a flourish that said he had practiced a great deal in front of reflective surfaces. "Good day to Dustwood," he cried, his voice ringing with that polished brightness that belongs to men who have never done an honest day's work but are willing to act it out. "You are the fortunate witnesses to a new age. An age where aches crawl out of the body like ashamed sinners, and vigor returns like a long-lost friend dragging a saloon piano." He hopped down, coattails swaying like theatrical curtains. Close up, you could see the care, the spotless gloves, the boots buffed hard enough to reflect disappointment, the watch chain draped just so. He looked like someone who ought to have authority if only because it would be a shame to waste the effort. He lifted a hand. "Permit me to introduce myself, Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift, late of the Atlantic Institute of Pan-American Therapeutics, a place whose existence he would defend with charming outrage, with lectures delivered before attentive crowds in St. Louis, Omaha, and that fussy temple of skepticism, Fort Dodge." A snort from a bearded man in a hat that might once have housed cattle. "Never heard of you." Grift's smile warmed. "Sir, your ear has not been properly introduced to progress. It is my honor to make the acquaintance." The horse sighed. Grift jerked the brake, and the wagon's side unfolded into a modest stage. A painted sign revealed itself like a magician's rabbit, a portrait of himself done by a forgiving hand, his jaw cleaner, his eyes bluer, his aura saintly. Beneath it, the words, infusions, decoctions, tinctures, and balm. He placed 3 crates upon the stage. From one, he produced a bottle, glass catching the sun, amber liquid glowing like a sermon promising that it will end soon. The label, splashed with calligraphy, read, "Dr. Grift's Universal Elixir of Life." It was the kind of bottle that suggested a bargain with destiny had been struck inside and was eager to meet you. "Friends," he said, "you are parched, not only in the tongue, which Dustwood does its level best to keep scourged, but in the spirit. Your backs ache from honest labor. Your lungs protest this wicked climate. Your nerves fray from the shrieking of lamentable circumstances. What if," his voice lowered intimately, "what if I could pack relief into a bottle you could hold?" A murmur. Relief in a bottle had always traveled this way, mostly labeled whiskey. But whiskey never promised to cure anything except the memory of why you needed it. A narrow woman in a bonnet narrowed further. "You a doctor, are you?" Grift put a hand to his chest. "Madam, I am a servant of relief. The titles men fight over are just goose feathers on wind. What matters is result. And I have results so crowded, I must stack them." He snapped his fingers. A boy, not his, but boys respond to snapping like dogs to whistles, came forward. Grift handed him the bottle. "Take a sniff," Grift said. "Do you smell the clear notes of vitality? The herbal efficacy?" The boy sniffed, squinted. "Smells like ginger, and if you mixed Sunday church with Saturday mistakes." "Ah," Grift clapped. "An excellent nose. You will do well in business. Now, hand it back before your prospects improve too quickly." He swung to the crowd with a conspirator's grin. "Allow me a demonstration. You, sir," he pointed to the bearded skeptic. "What ails you?" "Minding my own business," the man said, to a little ripple of laughter. Grift nodded gravely. "A common affliction. But humor me. Back, knees, a sense of being unappreciated?" "My shoulder," the man grudged, rotating an arm with all the grace of a rusted hinge. "Heard it digging a well that quit before I did." Grift pressed his lips thoughtfully, as if dialoguing with the muses. "A noble injury. Step up, if you please." The man hesitated, then mounted the stage. Grift took a small engraved spoon from his pocket, because medicine tastes more medicinal from engraved spoons, and poured a dram from the bottle. The liquid caught the light and pretended to mean it. "To the relief of honest toil," Grift said, and the man swallowed. The effect was immediate. The bite of grain alcohol warming the chest, ginger pinching the tongue. The man blinked, coughed, and then rolled his shoulder. "Well?" Grift said, neither impatient nor patient, simply confident that reality would flinch before performance. The man rolled again, the hinge less creaky for having been distracted. "Feels better." He sounded offended by the result. Grift shrugged like a humble genius. Not a miracle, of course, merely the predictable effect of compounds that cleanse the humors and brighten the circulation. One does not abolish wear in a day, but one may lube the gears. A couple of men laughed. One slapped his own shoulder, as if reminding it to cooperate. The saloon doors sighed open, releasing two drunks who had made early progress on personal cures. They squinted at the stage with that wary respect drunks have for other professionals. Grift saw his opening and widened it. "Ladies," he said, "do you tire? Do your evenings drag with the weight of men who mistake silence for conversation? Do you wish your husbands would stop arguing with their boots? This tonic restores cheer, appetite, and that romantic elasticity so essential to matrimonial concord." A blonde woman coughed into a handkerchief that had never met London. "What's in it?" "Science," Grift said. "The essence of roots tamed by spirit. A cordial of extraction, concentration, and aspiration. Ginger for the blood's dancing, molasses for the stomach's hymn, essential waters drawn from springs which have not seen a curse." "What's it cost?" called a voice that sounded like it had evicted other voices and won. Grift lifted the bottle to the sun. 50 cents. Less than a doctor's visit. Less than a card game's regret. Far less than carrying your pain another day. A whisper skittered through the crowd. 50 cents was kitchen money, shoe money, the difference between indulgence and the good opinion of a scowling spouse. It was also hope money. Before anyone could count the coins in their minds too carefully, Grift moved. He brought out cards. "And because this is a festive day," he said, "I shall entertain while you deliberate, so your decisions may be born of joy, not grim calculation. Observe." He flourished the deck, made it ripple. Cards danced between his fingers like trained moths. He drew the ace of hearts from behind the blonde woman's ear, to her astonishment and the crowd's delight. He tossed it into the air and it became, predictably, 2 cards, then 4, which became confetti, which he stuffed into his fist and opened to reveal a red silk handkerchief. His hands were steady, his patter smoother than an alibi. "Gross motor distraction with fine motor fraud," he narrated lightly as he worked, "is the foundation of all progress, from government to romance." Laughter loosened the crowd. Suspicion took a seat. He kept moving, never letting attention settle long enough to harden. A stuttering man was cured of hesitation long enough to laugh. A child declared him a wizard with the practical authority of the very young. The sheriff leaned on a post and decided to allow events to continue in case they ended well for him. Then Grift snapped the rope. "And now, friends, an inaugural sale, for the benefit of Dustwood's valiant population. Who among you will be the first to invest in their own relief?" The saloon drunks, feeling the benevolent nudge of their morning investments, shoved each other and slapped coins down. 2, one said. "My liver's been poor company." 3, the other countered. "I plan on becoming interesting." Grift took their money with solemn gratitude. "May your livers learn manners." He handed over bottles, and the men held them up like trophies. That broke the line. A stooped ranch hand counted out nickels, palm damp with the anxiety of buying something that might make him a fool. A girl with braids begged her mother, who relented with the expression of a woman lending hope to her own hope. A wiry man with tobacco in his beard bought a bottle and immediately poured a capful into his mule's trough, as if unwilling to be the only test subject in his household. "Ha," he said when the mule twitched an ear. "You see that?" Look at him perk. The mule was considering a fly. Evidence, as always, is a hard-working employee for the first bidder. Grift kept a running commentary, light as rain. A remedy for fatigue that restores both the body and the ambition to be less tedious. a tonic for nerves that sharpens the mind enough to recall if you insulted someone important last night. A cordial for digestion, most needed on Sundays, when sermons challenge the stomach as surely as breakfast. Coins clinked. Bottles lined up on the stage's edge and then disappeared from it, each one the sound of an appetite successfully advertised. Grift's hand moved without seeming to move, sweeping money into a drawer with the casual sanctity of a collection plate. A cough cut through the air, the hacking, sheet-tearing cough that meant lungs had given up on being lungs and were auditioning to be church bells. Heads turned. The source was a thin man in a limp collar, face the color of old linen. The preacher, as it happened. He grimaced, hand pressed to ribs. Grift turned toward him with a physician's gravity and a salesman's premonition. He stepped down from the stage and approached, bottle cradled like a sacrament. "Reverend," he said softly, for Dustwood loved a performance, and a whisper always gathers more ears than a shout. "Your calling extracts a price. Permit me to offset the account." The preacher swallowed, pride making a noisy bargain with pain. "I do not." The sentence collapsed into another cough. His wife reached for him, eyes glassy with a helpless sort of polite fury. Grift presented the bottle without flourish, which of course was its own flourish. A sip, not a cure. God keeps his prerogatives, but an aid. The preacher looked at his wife. She nodded. He drank. Alcohol's merciful warmth embraced the throat like a rash decision. The coughing paused for a moment, out-negotiated. "Thank you," the preacher said, not Christian enough to refuse relief entirely. Grift stepped back, gave the crowd an angle, not triumph, just a man doing a kindness he could afford. It landed. People like to reward benevolence in others when it doesn't cost them too much. A broad woman with flour on her sleeves stepped forward with a set jaw. "Two," she said, "for rheumatism and for my man's mouth." "An excellent pairing," Grift said. "One for the joints, one for the joint offender." By late afternoon, the town square was a theater with a shrinking prop department. The sun lay on Dustwood like an accusation, shadows lengthened with gossip. A boy ran past shouting, "He made a card come out his sleeve that wasn't there before." And a man muttered, "That's called Sunday dinner at my place," and bought a bottle to be part of the joke. Grift never stopped the gentle patter. The light derision spread evenly like butter, never cruel, never soft, just enough mockery to make the buyer feel clever for being in on it. He held an umbrella over a woman while he described the elixir's benefits in terms of renewed feminine sparkle, and when her husband scowled, Grift added, "And it softens masculine obstinacy to the consistency of well-cooked beans." The husband laughed with a mouth that did not want to, but found itself overruled. Toward evening, as the light thinned to something drinkable, sales slowed. The wagon's inventory had lost weight. The money drawer had gained morals. Grift wiped the neck of a bottle with ritual neatness and set it back. He turned to regard Dustwood with the fond air of a man who has been welcomed by a community and immediately rearranged its pantry. A lanky boy approached with a serious face that belonged on a banker in miniature. "If it cures all that," he said, "how come you ain't keepin' one for yourself?" Grift looked down at him, and the corners of his eyes creased. "Young sir, the cobbler's children go barefoot, the butcher's wife is pale, and a physician who drinks his own medicine loses credibility. Besides," he leaned down, "I am naturally invigorated by public service." The boy considered this, which took time for both of them. From the saloon came music, careless and wistful. The drunks who had bought first returned to the square to declare the elixir excellent because they felt excellent, which was indistinguishable from proof. One attempted a jig and nearly achieved it. The mule, in an unrelated show of independence, brayed. Grift packed slowly, never hurried, always allowing a last-minute impulse to find him. The sheriff ambled over with a posture that recommended a chair. "You plannin' to stay?" the sheriff asked, as if small talk were a civic duty. "Long enough to render service," Grift said. "Short enough to preserve novelty." The sheriff's eyes narrowed in a friendly way that had aborted friendships before. "Folks'll expect results." Grift put a hand to his heart. "Sheriff, I demand them." But results, like crops and sons-in-law, improve dramatically when attended by hope. My tonic is a handrail while they climb. The sheriff did not pretend to follow the metaphor. He spat neatly and said nothing, which is what passes for diplomacy in places with limited furniture. Night came on, lamps winked in windows. Dust rose and settled on everything with democratic dedication. Grift lit a lantern at the corner of his stage. The glow gave him a saintly halo that would have offended anyone who could afford to be offended. He sold 3 more bottles to men who liked the way the light made the liquid look like captured sunset. Then he bowed to the square as if it had applauded loudly and meant it. "Dustwood," he declared softly, almost to himself, but not so softly the town couldn't overhear. "You are a place of promise. Let us see if promise can be persuaded to keep itself." He took his supper at a table behind the saloon. Beans, bread, a slab of meat that had lost an argument with the skillet. He ate with small bites, chewing as if considering the flavor's future prospects. The saloon's piano argued with its own keys, while a woman sang about a river that remembered her name. Grift watched the door, the street, the sky. He counted the day's take by feel rather than by number. The rhythm of coins told him enough, moderate success humming like a well-tuned lie. Before turning in on the narrow pallet in his wagon, he wrote a line in a small ledger with a pencil sharpened to a lawyer's conscience. Dustwood, receptive, inventory diminished, gullibility robust, preacher, symptomatic and pliable, tomorrow, escalate premise. He set the pencil down, smiled at the moon, which had been fooled before. The horse shifted, dreaming of fields where ambition took the form of grass. Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift closed his eyes, and the town slept around him in the rough embrace of need. He did not dream. Dreams were for men who lacked plans. He had plans enough to rent them out. Far off, a coyote jeered at the dark. Closer, someone coughed. Bottles clinked on a bedside table and promised things into the night. The sun arrived in Dustwood with the subtlety of a drunk kicking in a door. It came hot, wide, and merciless, gilding the warped roofs and turning the air to soup before most of the town had rubbed sleep out of its eyes. But Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift was already awake, adjusting his cravat in the cracked mirror nailed inside his wagon. A man who sells salvation cannot afford to appear mortal before breakfast. His hair was slicked, his smile rehearsed, his pockets freshly lined with yesterday's harvest of coins. He tipped his hat at his own reflection, whispered, "Doctor, you magnificent scoundrel," and stepped out into the day. Dustwood, meanwhile, was buzzing. Word of the elixir had passed through the town faster than smallpox at a square dance. Old Mrs. Cartwright, widowed twice and still suspicious she'd been cheated out of a third, had declared over morning biscuits that her knees hadn't ached half as much since her first sip. Of course, her sip had been half the bottle, but no one was counting. Young Timmy Haskins swore the mule, the one given a splash of tonic, had looked him in the eye with a new kind of intelligence. He didn't elaborate, but he didn't need to. The saloon drunks, whose livers were seasoned veterans of alcohol's wars, announced to anyone within burping distance that the elixir had improved their dancing, their storytelling, and even their attractiveness to women. The women, notably, had not been consulted. By mid-morning, Dustwood was primed like a tinderbox, and Dr. Grift held the match. He began with the preacher. Always, always begin with the preacher. A town's faith was a wild horse. Tame it, and you could ride the whole herd. The Reverend Pritchard sat on his porch, coughing into a rag that could be wrung out like a rain cloud. Grift approached with his coat flapping just enough to look accidental. "Reverend," he said, voice dripping honey over rust. "How do you greet the day?" "With lungs that won't obey," Pritchard rasped. Grift clucked his tongue. Even Moses had to lean on his staff. "Allow me to supply you with a staff in bottled form." He pressed another vial into the preacher's palm. No charge, charity, the most profitable marketing strategy known to man. Pritchard's wife looked at the bottle as if it might decide her future, and maybe it had. By lunchtime, the Reverend was already boasting that he felt the spirit moving swifter in my chest. Dustwood's gossip network carried that message faster than scripture. Next target, the widow Burnham, queen of Dustwood's grapevine. She sat at her window like a spider with her web made of words. Convince her, and every kitchen and clothesline in town would hum with advertising. Widow, Grift said, bowing with exaggerated solemnity. You have carried burdens heavier than this town deserves to place on a single soul. Allow me to lighten them. He handed her a bottle. She squinted at it, then at him. Does it cure loneliness? Grift leaned close, stage whispering loud enough for half the street to hear. Ma'am, it cures the appearance of loneliness, which in society is the same thing. The widow cackled like a crow, fattened on gossip. I'll take 2. By dusk, she had told 12 people that she felt younger, livelier, and ready to take a third husband if one could be found. Dustwood was alive with rumor. The widow Burnham was smiling again. That alone was worth the price of admission. But the crowning absurdity came in the form of Jed Harkins, a man whose mule had apparently found religion after sipping from the trough. See here, Jed cried in the square, slapping the beast's flank. Ain't he brighter-eyed? Ain't his ears perked? The mule brayed with all the enthusiasm of indifference. Grift stepped in before reason could object. Friends, when even the humblest creature responds to the call of vitality, how can man resist? This animal testifies better than I could, and it works without the cost of a sermon. Dustwood laughed, and half the laughter turned into coins. That evening, Grift held court in the saloon. He didn't drink, not openly, but sipped his own tonic with the air of a man tasting wine in Paris. I assure you, gentlemen, he said to the circle around him, science has advanced beyond the need for guesswork. The Chinese emperors lived long on herbs. The Greeks wrestled lions on decoctions. And now, in the modern age, you may have it all in a bottle small enough to fit a lady's purse. Does it fix bad luck at cards? A man asked, shuffling with hands that had already lost more than they'd won. Absolutely, Griff said without hesitation. For when you lose, you will feel so cheerful you won't care. The table erupted in laughter, and 3 bottles were bought on the spot. By the end of day 2, Dustwood was drunk on expectation. Grift's drawer was heavy with coins, and his wagon lighter by nearly a dozen bottles. He walked the square that night like a mayor who had just been elected unanimously, tipping his hat to every face, his smile gleaming like a knife polished on other men's wallets. In his ledger, by lamplight, he wrote, Day 2, the town is mine. Hope ripens, faith swells. Tomorrow I harvest. And with that, he lay back in his wagon, folded hands over chest, and let Dustwood dream of bottled miracles. Morning in Dustwood arrived unusually enterprising, as if even the sun had decided to buy a bottle. Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift emerged from his wagon with the solemnity of a bishop approaching an offering plate and set about transforming the square into a temple of science. He strung bunting from the side rails, polished the bottles until they glowed like good intentions, and hung a fresh placard he'd lettered at dawn. Grand lecture this afternoon. On the nature of vital force, the misbehavior of humors, and how to make your bones regret nothing. Below it, in smaller script for those who trusted small print more than large, demonstrations, testimonials, limited supply, cash preferred, barter considered if entertaining. By noon, Dustwood had brought itself to the square in its best approximation of finery. Men wore clean shirts, women adjusted the same bonnet differently and called it fashion. Children spread out like a prophecy of trouble. The sheriff leaned on a post as if the post owed him money. The preacher sat up front with a righteous expression improved by a discreet flask-shaped bulge in his coat. Grift took the stage as the piano from the saloon banged out 3 notes and gave up. He raised his hands and the crowd hushed, that miraculous hush a con man feels the way a banker feels interest accruing. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, Dustwood has given me the honor of your ears, and I intend to fill them with knowledge so rich you will leave here heavy-headed and light-hearted." He pulled a chalkboard from the wagon, a black slab with a crack like a lightning bolt, and drew, with admirable confidence, a wobbly diagram of a human figure composed of circles and arrows. "Observe the human body," he said, tapping the chalk against the figure's chest. "A machine of tubes and tides. Within you flows the vital force, a river of health that men of lesser education might describe as pep. This river is sometimes dammed by bad air, ill humor, marital discord, and the moon's sulking. My task is to remove the dam with a gentle flood." He drew a bottle where the heart should be. The crowd's heads leaned forward, as if pulled by a string tied to their chins. "What have physicians offered you?" Grift demanded. "Leeches, sawbones, Latin words said with a grave face and a jovial bill. I say, enough. Enough of bleeding to prove you are alive. Enough of poultices made from weeds that resent you. We stand in a new century. Well, close enough. And we must embrace a new remedy." He held up the elixir, and it caught the light so impeccably that several people decided then and there to be impressed. Dr. Grift's universal elixir of life. Not a cure-all, that would be unscientific, a cure-many, a remedy for fatigue, a solace for the nerves, a friend to the joints, a harmonizer of the stomach, a civilizer of the disposition. A hand shot up. Old Mrs. Cartwright, whose skepticism and curiosity wrestled in public with a lifetime record of 13 wins and no losses for curiosity. "What about female complaints?" she asked, producing a cord of throat-clearing from the menfolk. Grift inclined his head. "Madam, it smooths them like a peacemaker at a family supper. Why, in Omaha, a woman thanked me for restoring her monthly regularity to such punctuality, the trains looked to her for guidance." A gasp, a titter, a sail prefigured itself in Mrs. Cartwright's eyes. "Demonstration," Grift announced. He pointed to a narrow-shouldered young man with acne on his ambitions. "You, sir. What ails you?" "Night terrors," the young man said, which was brave, idiotic, or both. "Of what nature?" "Dream. I'm being chased by chickens the size of wagons." "Classic," Grift said gravely, as if he'd studied it in a Viennese pamphlet. "A wrench in the nerve spring. Step up." He measured a spoonful with ceremonial care, fed it to the youth, and murmured, "Now fix your eyes on my finger. Think of a calm pasture, and remember that chickens are edible." The young man blinked, swayed, and smiled faintly, the soothing of alcohol's charitable diplomacy. The crowd sighed. A woman whispered, "He looks peaceful," as if peace had been a personality he'd rented for the occasion. Next, Grift produced a sealed letter with a crest so dignified it had been drawn from memory. A testimonial from the Honorable Mayor Wilkins of, he squinted, St. Dymphna's Ford, who writes, "Dear Doctor, after 3 doses, I danced at my daughter's wedding, and my enemies wept to see it." He held the page aloft just long enough that no one could read the part where the ink bled into nonsense. Applause, the modest kind that says, "This pleases me, and I do not want to be the only one pleased." From there, the lecture ascended into a carnival of sense and nonsense. He cracked pepper into a glass and called it stimulating the pneuma. He waved burning sage and declared it purifying the ether of negative domestic utterance, to which 3 men laughed and 3 women bought bottles. He quoted Hippocrates in Greek, which sounded remarkably like something he'd just made up and then translated into better-sounding English. "Now," he said, lowering his voice to the warm hum of a secret, "I am obliged to tell you the truth that lesser men hide. Healing requires participation. This elixir does not drag you to health like a stubborn goat. It invites you to walk there briskly. You must drink plenty of clean water, boil if necessary, and rest when God whispers it. You must treat your wife as you would a nervous horse, and your husband as you would a sleepwalking child. Do these, take 2 spoonfuls morning and night, and watch your vigor stand up and button its coat." People nodded. Advice that asked little and promised much lived rent-free in Dustwood's head. Then, inevitably, doubt arrived, wearing a child's face. A small boy, freckles arranged on his nose like buckshot, wriggled through the front until he stood by the stage with the clear sense that rules were ornamental. "Can I try it?" he asked. Grift smiled indulgently. "Children should not." "I drink coffee," the boy said, which settled who was in charge. The crowd loved him. Grift saw a trap and sprung it anyway. "A drop," he said, only to show the benevolence of the compound. He tipped the spoon. The boy gulped, made a face that passed through 4 weather systems, and then, spectacularly, decisively, vomited onto the packed earth with the enthusiasm of a sermon against sin. A collective intake of breath. The preacher made a noise like a hymn choking on itself. The sheriff raised his eyebrows 2 polite inches. A woman shrieked. A man laughed. The mule, sensing opportunity, brayed. Grift did not miss a beat. He thrust a hand toward the heavens. "Behold," he cried, voice filled with triumph usually reserved for comets and airs. "The expulsion of the noxious humors." The body, once awakened, rejects the stale bile and unseen miasmas that impede vigor. "Young sir, how do you feel?" The boy wiped his mouth, considered the philosophic implications of being the center of attention, and declared, "Better." "Of course he does," Grift said, as if rudeness were a medical condition now cured. The crowd, relieved to have permission, laughed and exhaled their doubt like smoke. A mother whispered, "Purge is good," and the day continued. A different sort of doubt, heavier and less easily amused, approached next. A stoop-shouldered miner named F. Reams, who had never encountered a claim that wasn't salted. "Doc," F. said, using the title as a test of manners. "My brother tried something like this in Abilene. Didn't cure his cough none. Cured him of $1. Grift's face arranged itself into the portrait of wounded professionalism. "Sir, I cannot answer for imitators. Charlatans dog the heels of progress like burrs. They steal labels, they dilute formulas, they peddle sawdust dreams. But this," he tapped the bottle, "is mine. You see my face on the label? Counterfeiters cannot reproduce this expression of benevolent severity." A ripple of laughter. F didn't smile. Still, 50 cents is 50 cents. Grift leaned forward. "Then don't buy it." Silence. The words fell like a plate crashing. "Because, sir," Grift continued gently, "cures resentment, skepticism. Medicines, like mules and marriages, respond best to faith. If doubt sits on your shoulder, it will weigh the bottle down. Let your 50 cents stay in your pocket, where it can achieve the high calling of lint." F blinked. He was not used to being told to keep his money. The crowd shifted. Pride bristled. Pride and an odd yearning to prove they were not the sort of people too poor in spirit to believe. F's jaw worked. "Fine," he grunted. "Give me one." Grift sold him 2, and there it was. The peak. Coins clinked like hail. Bottles flew into hands. The preacher rose, declared he felt a prospect of vigor unseen since the revival of '68, and bought for the church ladies. The widow Burnham purchased a 3rd, explaining loudly that one must invest in self-improvement, especially when men are scarce. Even the sheriff bought a bottle, ostensibly for evidence, which he sipped with forensic diligence. Grift rode the crest the way a barn cat rides a windowsill, balanced, smug, potentially asleep, but never actually. He proposed a family size for $1. 3 families discovered they were unexpectedly large. He unveiled a liniment that had been born of a mislabeled crate, and half the ranch hands decided their horses wanted it. He kept jokes moving like plates on a stick. 1 spoonful in the morning and your chores will chase you to be done. Mix with coffee only if you plan to rebuild the barn twice. Apply to your husband's temper externally. And yet, because no day is perfect and satire requires friction, the crack spread quietly. The young woman with the braids who had purchased a bottle the previous day returned, grim-faced. "I gave some to Grandpa," she said. "He slept all afternoon. Wouldn't wake for supper." "Then it worked," Grift said smoothly. "Sleep is the king's road to healing." He snored like a thunderstorm and cussed in his sleep. A cleansing of the soul's attic. She hesitated, then accepted an additional bottle at a discount so artful it left her with the impression she'd made money by spending it. Toward sunset, a child, another one, Dustwood was crawling with the raw materials of future voters, complained of a bellyache after swigging too heartily from his mother's purchase. He cried, declared himself dying, and then fell asleep in the dirt, which diluted the drama. Grift explained this as the body choosing restoration over narrative. There was also Mrs. McReady, who aired a grievance in public tones. I took 2 spoonfuls, and my bunion still looks like it has opinions. Then you must take 3, Grift replied. Mathematics is the only reliable magic. By the time the sun bled down behind the low hills, Grift's crates were thin enough to see through. He offered a closing benediction to the satisfied town. Friends, he said, voice mellow, I will remain through the night to ensure all who desire relief may obtain it. Tomorrow, duty calls me onward to spread Dustwood's good report across the prairie so that other towns may envy your vigor. A murmur of pride. Dustwood, vigorous. The very word felt like a bath. He packed slowly, again. People lingered, savoring the aftertaste of spectacle. Ream stood to one side, counting the sips left in his first bottle with a look that suggested a future lawsuit, whatever the century. The sheriff tipped the last of his evidence down his throat and declared himself disposed to view the world sympathetically, which is lawman for soft. That night, the square cooled. The stars behaved themselves. Grift wrote in his ledger, Day 3, harvest complete. Skepticism manageable. Convert with patience and arithmetic. A minor emetic incident repurposed into triumph. Depart at dawn before anecdotes mature. He slept the easy sleep of a man who had successfully rented hope and charged for cleaning. At first light, long before Dustwood could muster its collective memory, Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift buttoned his coat, fastened the wagon, and rolled out. He left behind a square speckled with sawdust and footprints, a dozen empty bottles decorating nightstands, and a town full of people pleasantly certain that health had begun and any failure to continue would be their own fault for not following instructions. The banner flapped, wonders of science and spirit. The horse plodded with a martyr's patience. Grift tipped his hat to the waking world. Onward, he told the road. There's always another thirst. Behind him, Dustwood stirred, coughed, stretched, and remembered how nice it felt to believe something, at least until the coffee wore off. Ahead, the horizon brightened with the promise of Silver Creek, where success would grow fat and greed, patient creature, would lick its paws. The road bent eastward, and with it bent the fortunes of Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift. Dustwood had been a trial run, a dress rehearsal performed for an audience of the desperate and the credulous. But Silver Creek was another matter entirely. It shimmered in the distance like a mirage that had gone into business for itself. Where Dustwood sagged, Silver Creek strutted. Where Dustwood whispered, Silver Creek boasted. It was bigger, cleaner, with clapboard facades freshly painted and streets that gave the impression someone had once considered sweeping them. The town's wealth lay not in rumor, but in the silver veins gouged from the nearby hills. Dustwood had hope. Silver Creek had cash, and plenty of it. Grift's horse, which had endured 2 days of dust, misery, and the doctor's monologues, gave a grunt that might have been relief or despair. The wagon squeaked into the main street, the banner flapping like a herald announcing a minor apocalypse. The locals noticed. Silver Creek noticed everything, mostly because it liked judging newcomers. Men lounged outside the barbers, chewing toothpicks with the gravity of Supreme Court justices. Women peeked from behind lace curtains that probably cost more than Dustwood's general store. Children scattered, shrieking, already guessing this was the sort of man who might juggle fire or get arrested. Grift stood tall in his wagon seat, tipping his hat with such practiced gallantry that half the town felt briefly complimented. He cleared his throat, spread his arms, and began. Ladies and gentlemen of Silver Creek, fortune smiles twice upon you today. Once for having been born in a town so prosperous, and once again for the arrival of a modest physician with an immodest remedy. The barber spat. Another tonic peddler, he muttered. Grift heard it. Of course he did. A con man's ears are sharper than a loan shark's memory, but he turned the moment into theater. Another? He said loudly. Would you say, good sir, that another sunrise is redundant? Another dollar unwelcome? Another kiss excessive? Laughter rippled, reluctant but real. The barber scowled and folded his arms, beaten by democracy. Grift flourished a bottle from his wagon, sunlight dancing through the amber liquid like it had been hired for the job. Behold, Dr. Grift's universal elixir of life. Proven in laboratories east of the Mississippi, tested, tasted, and trusted. A man from the crowd yelled, trusted by who? By the Almighty, if he has good taste, Grift shot back, to more laughter. But Silver Creek wasn't Dustwood. Its citizens weren't content to be charmed by words alone. They wanted proof. They wanted spectacle. And Grift, who never traveled without contingency plans for disbelief, was ready. From behind the wagon curtain, he pulled a stooge, a wiry man he'd picked up on the road with promises of whiskey and $1. The man hobbled forward, clutching his leg with the dramatics of a Shakespearean understudy. "This poor fellow," Grift proclaimed, "suffers from chronic lameness of the left limb, brought on by a mining accident involving gravity and bad judgment. Watch closely." He poured a spoonful of elixir, slid it past the stooge's lips, and then clapped his hands. "Rise, friend. Rise with vigor renewed." The man wobbled, straightened, and, miracle of miracles, walked without a limp. The crowd gasped. A woman clutched her pearls. A miner muttered, "Well, I'll be." The stooge even gave a little hop, just to gild the lily. "Observe," Grift said, "the restoration of motion, the resurrection of spirit, the triumph of science over calamity." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then building. Silver Creek had seen its share of humbugs, but they had not seen this particular humbug, and novelty counts for half of truth. Coins began to clink, slowly, then steadily. A rancher bought 2 bottles for his rheumatism and his wife's complaints. A shopkeeper purchased one just to keep up appearances. Children begged their mothers for a taste and were told to hush, though the mothers themselves slipped coins forward. The sheriff, a man of broad shoulders and an expression carved from suspicion, watched it all with narrowed eyes. Grift caught his gaze, tipped his hat, and said, "Lawman, I salute your service. Should you ever require more stamina in your duties, I would be honored to extend my professional generosity." The sheriff snorted but didn't interfere. That was permission enough. By dusk, Grift had sold nearly half a crate, no small feat for a first day in a town that prided itself on discernment, but he was not content with sales alone. Oh no. He wanted Silver Creek dazzled. He wanted them to not only believe in his elixir, but to perform their belief, loudly, lavishly, and at his benefit. So he made an announcement. "Tomorrow night," he declared, "in your very own opera house, I shall deliver a lecture and exhibition unlike anything seen west of the Mississippi. Fire, music, testimonials, and the secrets of health as practiced in the mystical Orient. Admission, free. Seating, limited. Expectation, limitless." The crowd murmured with excitement. The opera house. Nothing gave a scam dignity quite like renting the fanciest hall in town. That night, in the back room of the boarding house, Grift sat counting his coins while the stooge snored beside him on the floor. He scribbled in his ledger, "Day 4, Silver Creek ripe. Stooge performance adequate. Tomorrow, expand operation. They believe, but not yet enough. They must crave." He leaned back, stretched, and smiled. Dustwood had been practice. Silver Creek was the real show. Here, he would not only sell elixir, he would sell himself as a prophet of progress. And maybe, just maybe, he would finally test the limits of his luck. Morning in Silver Creek began with whispers about the coming spectacle. By sunrise, word of Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift's grand Oriental exhibition and lecture on vital force had leapt from the boarding house maid to the butcher's wife, from the butcher's wife to her neighbor, and from the neighbor to anyone with ears. By noon, the town buzzed with anticipation, the way a hive buzzes when it's about to regret a beekeeper's visit. The opera house had not seen such excitement since the famous traveling tenor broke his leg halfway through La Traviata. Tonight, however, there would be no music of Verdi, no tragic aria, unless one counted Grift's own voice, which he did, preparing the stage. Grift spent the afternoon arranging the opera house with the flair of a carnival barker and the solemnity of a funeral director. The stooge, now promoted to assistant demonstrator of miracles, hung banners reading, "The secrets of longevity unveiled, proof before your very eyes, cures from the mystical Orient, now within your reach." At center stage, Grift positioned a long table draped in crimson cloth. On it gleamed rows of bottles, each one polished so fiercely they looked like captured sunsets. Behind them loomed the chalkboard, improved with an even wobblier drawing of the human body, now decorated with arrows suggesting energy flowed in and out like cattle through a gate. To top it off, he placed 2 small fireworks, purchased cheaply from a traveling tinker, at the edges of the stage. Nothing seduces a crowd like the smell of burning powder. The opera house fills. By early evening, the opera house swelled, farmers in clean boots, shopkeepers in Sunday coats, ladies in lace who had never before set foot in such a place without a hymn book. Even the skeptical sheriff took a seat in the back, arms folded, eyes narrowed. Most important of all, Mayor Clayton Hollis himself, seated in the front row, puffing like a bullfrog in a waistcoat. His rheumatism had long been the stuff of town gossip. He could barely climb the steps to the mayor's office without cursing half the 10 Commandments. Grift, spotting him, nearly wept with gratitude. A mayor was worth more than 100 widows and mules combined. The spectacle begins. The lamps dimmed. Grift appeared in the glow of lantern light, arms outstretched, coattails trailing like a prophet's shadow. "People of Silver Creek," he thundered, his voice booming as though he had borrowed the lungs of God himself. "Tonight, you are witness to the greatest triumph of the human spirit over the tyranny of frailty." He snapped his fingers. The stooge lit the small fireworks. They hissed, fizzled, and then exploded with a crack and a plume of smoke that made 3 women shriek and a dozen children cheer. Grift spread his arms, inhaled the acrid smoke like incense, and declared, "Even the elements rejoice." Applause, wild and eager. He launched into his lecture, a mixture of pseudoscience, mangled philosophy, and sheer nonsense, delivered with the confidence of a man who had never once doubted his own lies. "The human body," he said, tapping the chalkboard, "is a palace of pipes and pumps. When the pumps fail, we suffer. When the pipes clog, we ache. But with this," he lifted a bottle high, "we scour the pipes, polish the pumps, and restore the palace to its rightful splendor." Demonstrations. First, the stooge again, limping onto the stage, drinking the elixir, and miraculously striding off to thunderous applause. Second, a volunteer, a miner who admitted to back pains something fierce. Grift poured him a spoonful. The man swallowed, grimaced, then stretched cautiously. "How do you feel?" Grift demanded. "Warmer," the miner admitted. "Warmer," Grift roared. "And what is warmth but the herald of circulation restored?" The crowd cheered as though the man had risen from the grave. The mayor's turn. And then, the coup de théâtre. "Mr. Mayor," Grift said, bowing low, "might we borrow your esteemed presence?" The mayor, bloated with pride and perhaps whiskey, puffed his way onto the stage. His limp was so pronounced the board seemed to groan in sympathy. Grift poured him a generous dose, placed the spoon between his lips, and held his breath. The mayor swallowed, winced, then rolled his shoulders. Slowly, dramatically, perhaps instinctively aware of his role in this theater, he straightened. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "It does feel better." The crowd erupted. Hats flew into the air. A woman wept. The sheriff raised his eyebrows a full quarter-inch. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grift cried above the roar, "when the very mayor of Silver Creek finds relief in this humble bottle, who among you can deny its virtue?" The frenzy. Sales exploded like the fireworks had promised. Bottles vanished by the dozen. Women bought them for their husbands, men for their wives, children begged for them like candy. The opera house became a marketplace of hope, clinking coins and shouted orders echoing like hymns in a revival tent. Grift doubled the price on the spot. Instead of protest, the crowd surged harder. After all, if the price rose, surely it must be worth more. By the time the lamps guttered low, his crates were nearly empty. His pockets bulged with silver and gold. He shook hands, signed autographs on scraps of paper, and even gave the sheriff a complimentary bottle for law enforcement emergencies. Nightfall. Later, in his boarding house room, Grift counted his profits until the stooge complained of dizziness from watching. In his ledger he wrote, "Day 5. Triumph unparalleled. Opera house a success. Mayor converted. Prices doubled, sales tripled. Town drunk on faith and liquor. Tomorrow, tighten the screws." He leaned back, eyes gleaming. Dustwood had been a stepping stone. Silver Creek was a banquet. And he, Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift, was feasting like a king. But kings, history reminded those who cared to listen, often lost their heads. Grift, naturally, did not listen. Silver Creek awoke to a hangover of optimism. The opera house spectacle had baptized the town in miracle, and now every parlor, saloon, and barber's chair hummed with talk of Grift's elixir. Men slapped their knees and claimed they hadn't felt so limber in years. Women swore their complexions glowed brighter than the lamps. Even the mayor strutted about with his cane tucked under his arm like a hunting rifle, boasting he could take the stairs like a boy again. The sheriff, of course, muttered that a shot of whiskey could achieve the same, but nobody wanted skepticism when faith tasted so sweet. Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift rose late, breakfasted on ham and eggs he had no intention of paying for, and admired his reflection in the polished glass of the boarding house window. He looked, he decided, every inch the man who deserved to fleece a prosperous town, raising the stakes. By noon, he had rolled his wagon back into the square. A crowd gathered immediately, hungry for more. Grift mounted the stage with a bow that suggested he was doing the town a personal favor merely by existing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "last night you witnessed wonders. Tonight, you will see more. But take heed, miracles, like gold, are finite. Supplies dwindle. The cost of ingredients rises. And so," he spread his hands in mock sorrow, "the price must reflect this reality. From this day forward, a single bottle of my universal elixir shall be $5. Gasps, murmurs, a hiss or two. $5 was no trivial sum. It was a week's wages to some, a month's luxuries to others. But Grift pressed on, his voice wrapping around them like barbed velvet. "Would you haggle with your health? Would you put a price tag on your wife's vigor, your children's laughter, your own ability to rise from bed without cursing the dawn? $5 is not payment. It is investment. Investment in life itself." And damn him, it worked. A few hands went up, reluctantly at first, then with a desperate certainty. A woman cried, "I'll take one," and that was all it took. The line formed again, and coins changed hands. The insults. But Grift, drunk on his own momentum, pushed further. He began to mock those who hesitated. "You, sir," he called, pointing at a farmer chewing his lip. "Do you mean to tell me your cows are worth more than your constitution? Perhaps you enjoy arthritis. It gives your hands character, does it?" Laughter rippled. The farmer flushed, dug into his pocket, and produced $5. "And you, madam," Grift said to a bonneted woman clutching her purse, "surely you wouldn't deny your husband relief from his labors. Unless, of course, you secretly long for him to die young so you may remarry." The crowd laughed louder, and the woman's face burned scarlet. She bought 2 bottles. Every hesitation, every question, every doubt, Grift twisted them into ridicule, and ridicule into sales. The crowd was a beast, and he had it by the reins. The first cracks. Yet beneath the frenzy, cracks formed. Sheriff Dunlop, watching from the shade, spat into the dust. "Man's digging a hole he won't climb out of," he muttered to no one in particular. And sure enough, trouble brewed. A miner named Pike staggered forward, coughing violently. He held up an empty bottle. "Bought this yesterday," he wheezed. "Drank it all. Didn't do a lick of good. My chest feels worse than ever." The crowd fell silent. Grift's smile didn't falter. He leapt from the stage, clapped the miner on the back, and said, "Friend, you have made the classic mistake. You attempted to outrun your illness with enthusiasm. A bottle a day? That is not medicine, it is gluttony. Even God himself took 7 days to build the world. Did you think your lungs deserved less patience than creation?" The crowd laughed again, nervously, and Pike, red-faced, slunk back into the mass. The deputy's collapse. But then came the deputy. Sheriff Dunlop's right-hand man, Deputy Collins, had been bragging all day about his vigor since taking the tonic. To prove it, he had gulped half a bottle in the saloon before lunch. Now, in the afternoon sun, he stumbled into the square, pale as parchment, clutching his stomach. He fell to his knees, vomited spectacularly, and collapsed face first into the dust. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted, "He's poisoned!" For the first time, Grift's silver tongue faltered. Only for a heartbeat, but a heartbeat was enough. The sheriff pushed through the crowd, knelt beside his deputy, and turned a glare on Grift sharp enough to shave with. Grift raised his hands. "Ladies and gentlemen, do not be alarmed. This is the body's natural purge. The elixir drives out toxins, sometimes vigorously. He will rise renewed, a man reborn." But the deputy did not rise. He twitched, groaned, and lay still. The crowd's faith wavered. Grift could feel it slipping, the sweet, intoxicating trust of the masses, like sand pouring through a sieve. He doubled down. "Do not doubt what your own eyes have seen," he cried. "The mayor walks straighter, the widows laugh brighter, the children leap higher. One man's constitution fails, and you would condemn the miracle itself. That is like blaming the sun for a man who trips at dawn." It was brilliant rhetoric, and it slowed the tide, but the sheriff's eyes never left him, cold and unblinking. Ledger notes. That night, in the dim boarding house, Grift wrote in his ledger with a trembling hand he refused to acknowledge as trembling. Day 6. Raised prices successfully. Sales strong despite minor incident. Deputy collapsed. Sheriff suspicious. Crowd restless. Greed is a stern mistress, but I obey. Must plan tomorrow carefully. One misstep, and Silver Creek will eat me alive. He closed the book, stared at the ceiling, and muttered to himself, "They love me too much to turn. They must." But the silence of the room seemed to disagree. Morning in Silver Creek arrived not with roosters but with rumor. It wafted through the town like wood smoke, curling into every shop and parlor. The deputy had collapsed. The sheriff was watching. Some said the elixir was blessed, others said it was poison, still others said it was both depending on the size of the spoonful. By breakfast, even the eggs tasted skeptical. Whispers at the Prospector's Rest. Grift sat in the dining room of the Prospector's Rest, immaculate in his pressed black coat, sipping coffee as if he had invented it. Around him the talk swirled. "I heard the deputy's dyin'." "Dyin'?" He was snoring when they carried him out. Snoring is just dyin' with rhythm. "Well, the mayor says his knees are good as new." That counts for something. Mayor's knees been crooked since Polk was president. He'd say anything for free tickets. The innkeeper's wife, bustling with a tray, leaned in close. "They say Sheriff Dunlop's coming for you, Doctor." Grift smiled, teeth sharp as a pickaxe. "Madam, sheriffs are like indigestion. They threaten, they bluster, but with the right tonic, they pass." She sniffed and walked away, unimpressed. A visit from the sheriff. The tonic of confidence soured an hour later when Sheriff Dunlop himself filled the doorway. He wasn't merely large. He was the kind of large that seemed structural, as if the town might collapse if he left. His boots thudded across the floorboards like gavel strikes. "Doc," he said, tipping his hat not out of politeness but gravity. "Sheriff?" Grift answered, rising with a bow that suggested two gentlemen at a duel. "You sellin' today?" "Of course. Progress waits for no man." "You might want to wait for Collins," Dunlop said flatly. "He's still layin' in my jail cot, pale as a ghost with nothing to haunt." Grift spread his hands. "The man drank a bottle in a sitting. If you drowned in whiskey, would you sue the river?" "Maybe. If the river was running a con." The room chuckled nervously. Dunlop's eyes never left Grift. "You'll have your show tonight," Dunlop said, "but I'll be there. And if one more man falls, so help me, Doc, I'll put irons on your wrists before your hat hits the ground." Grift inclined his head. "Sheriff, may Providence spare me your enthusiasm." "Until tonight, then." Dunlop left. His boots echoed long after the door closed. The barber's revolt. That afternoon, as Grift hawked bottles on Main Street, the barber decided to stage his own performance. He marched forward, bottle in hand, eyes blazing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he cried, mimicking Grift's cadence. "I drank this snake oil yesterday. You know what happened? Nothin'. Not a blessed thing. My back still aches, my hairline's still retreatin', and my patience is worn thinner than a Sunday hymn." The crowd stirred. Some nodded. A few frowned. Grift clapped, smiling broadly. "Behold, the barber speaks, and what does he say? That he is unchanged. Of course he is unchanged, for this man," Grift pointed, voice rising, "has been drinking bitterness longer than any medicine could reach. He is a monument to doubt, a shrine to sourness. My elixir cannot cure his back, for his spine bends beneath his own scowl." Laughter rippled. The barber flushed red as a beet. "And yet," Grift added, softening, "even this monument may crumble. I suggest another spoonful, not for his back, but for his smile." The crowd roared. The barber, cornered, bought another bottle out of spite. Collins stirs. By late afternoon, word spread that Deputy Collins had sat up, groaned, and demanded water. The rumor galloped through Silver Creek, shedding embellishments like sparks. "He's cured!" cried one. "He's walkin'!" shouted another. "I heard he arm wrestled the sheriff and won," claimed a third. By the time the sun lowered, Collins had already ascended to folk hero status, all while still sweating on a cot. Grift seized the tale. "You see," he told passers-by, "even a constitution as stubborn as Collins's bends to my elixir. The man vomited poison and now rises renewed. Tomorrow he will ride, next week he will dance, and by spring he will sing tenor." The crowd laughed, the mood lightened. Bottles sold. Doubt was not dead, but it was dozing. The evening show. The opera house filled again. If yesterday had been triumph, tonight was trial. Every man and woman carried not only coins, but questions. The sheriff sat in the front row this time, arms folded, star gleaming in lamplight. The barber lurked near the stage, determined to pounce. Mayor Hollis leaned on his cane, still basking in his new straightness. Grift strode onto the stage with confidence he only half felt. He raised his hands for silence. "Citizens of Silver Creek, last night you witnessed proof. Tonight you shall witness perseverance. One stumble does not undo a marathon. One cough does not condemn a choir. Progress, my friends, always limps before it runs." He launched into his lecture, chalk squealing across the board. Arrows, organs, invisible poisons, miraculous expulsions. He performed the coin trick, the bouquet trick, the testimonial letter. He paraded the stooge, who feigned a bad back and then leapt about like a rejuvenated colt. The crowd laughed, clapped, and shouted. Coins began to flash again. The collapse. Then it happened. A young ranch hand, eager to impress his sweetheart, gulped half a bottle at once. 10 minutes later, he turned pale, staggered, and collapsed in the aisle, retching violently. His sweetheart screamed. The crowd froze. The sheriff surged to his feet. "That's it, Grift. This ends now." But Grift, with the reflex of desperation, raised his arms. "Friends, do not fear. You see before you not death, but detoxification. The boy's body rejects the poisons of his idle living. Tomorrow he will rise brighter, stronger." The boy groaned, rolled onto his side, and muttered, "I feel awful." Grift pounced. "He speaks. Proof of life. Would a corpse confess its misery? Never. He is healing even as we stand." Some laughed, some clapped, others hissed. The crowd was splitting down the middle, believers and doubters, faith and fury. The sheriff mounted the stage, hand on his revolver. "Doc, you're done." The escape. Grift's mind raced. He had one trick left, smoke and speed. "Sheriff," he said, smiling, "you are right. I am done. Done hiding the full power of my discovery." He struck a match, lit a hidden firework. With a shriek and a flash, sparks exploded, filling the stage with smoke. The crowd screamed and scattered. Through the haze, Grift grabbed his crate of coins, vaulted off stage, and sprinted for the back door. The stooge, coughing and limping for real this time, followed. Bullets cracked behind them. The sheriff fired twice into the smoke, missing. Someone shouted, "Stop him!" but panic drowned the order. Grift burst into the alley, leapt onto his wagon, and slapped the reins. The tired horse, startled into heroism, bolted. The wagon rattled down the street, banner flapping like a fleeing flag. Behind him, Silver Creek boiled with chaos, shouts, curses, half-believers defending him, skeptics baying for blood. The sheriff ran into the street, gun raised, but the wagon was already a blur in the dusk. Grift laughed, wild and breathless, clutching his crate of coins. "Progress rides again," he shouted to the night. The horse snorted in protest but kept running. Ledger notes. Later, camped by the river miles outside town, Grift lit a lantern and opened his ledger. Day 7. Disaster and triumph entwined. Raised price to $5. Profitable. Deputy collapsed. Nearly ruin, but survived. Barber humiliated again. Final show. Boy collapsed. Crowd split. Sheriff drew iron. Escaped in smoke. Silver Creek closed to me forever. Profits. Considerable. Reputation. Precarious. Must seek new ground. He paused, tapped the pencil, and added, "Next stop. A town less gullible, more skeptical. A challenge. A chance to prove even the hardest rock can be carved by persistence and a silver tongue." He shut the ledger, leaned back, and smiled. The night was quiet except for the river and the distant laughter of coyotes. Silver Creek was behind him, but ahead lay another stage, another crowd, another chance. The trail bent north into country that had traded romance for regulations. You could tell by the fences, straight as sermons, and the neatness of the fields, which suggested that even the wind had to file a plan before crossing. The first thing Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift saw of Ironwood was not a steeple or a saloon, but a signboard on stout posts, Town of Ironwood. Respect work. Obey law. No peddling without permit. Beneath, in a hand less official and more determined, someone had added, no elixirs, no excuses. Grift tipped his hat to the sign as one tips to a rival. Ah, a town that pronounces its consonants, he murmured. His horse sneezed skeptically and kept moving. Ironwood looked prosperous in the reserved way of a banker who owns dry land and patience. The main street was swept. The storefronts had windows clean enough to let you see yourself being judged. The people were the tidy sort, shirt collars stiff, skirts pressed, boots recently acquainted with soap, who made a habit of being on time to things, church, supper, outrage. He rolled in, at a measured pace, no banner-flapping flourish this time. His canvas still claimed wonders of science and spirit, but the wind politely refused to help. Children appeared, but they stayed behind their mothers' skirts like troops behind fortifications. Men paused in their work to watch, hands still on tools, the way a jury pauses with its pencils. The sheriff came first because in Ironwood civic order was punctual. He was a compact man named Hart, not tall, but shaped like the word sturdy. His tin star was polished to an argument. Name, he said. Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift, Grift answered, stepping down with a politeness he usually rented. Doctor by broad recognition, if not by paperwork ruined in the regrettable flood of '63. We did not have a flood in '63, Hart said. That's why it was regrettable elsewhere, Grift said gently. Hart didn't smile. You see the sign? I do. It warms me to discover a town that spells, he produced a card no authority had issued and no authority would recognize. Atlantic Institute of Pan-American Therapeutics, lecturer. I am a lecturer rather than a peddler. The bottles are a footnote to understanding. Permit, Hart said. Grift folded, bowed, adjusted. Then I shall apply for one. Town Hall, Hart said, jerking his chin toward a building that resembled a good intention with a roof. You try to sell without a permit, I take your wagon. You try to bolt, I take your horse. You try to argue, I take your time. Ironwood speaks plainly, Grift said. If I were a lesser man, I'd take offense. Being me, I take notes. Town Hall contained Mayor Agnes Rook, who had the posture of a rule book and the eyes of someone who had personally chased waste from the budget with a broom. Beside her sat Mr. Penrith, clerk and connoisseur of dots to place above eyes, and Mrs. Eliza March, schoolteacher, whose spectacles framed intelligence like a sheriff's star frames authority. A lecturer, Mayor Rook said, reading his card as one reads a stranger's obituary. We prefer lectures with citations. How surprising, Grift said brightly, for I prefer audiences with patience. Mrs. March cleared her throat. Your specialty? Vital forces, the misbehavior of humors, and how digestion is the republic conducted in miniature. Penrith's pen scratched a note with audible skepticism. Mayor Rook folded her hands. We had a radish tonic 3 years ago. And? Grift asked. 2 stomach aches and a fist fight, Mrs. March said. The fist fight was the only thing that lasted. Then I must work harder than a radish, Grift said. Permit me to present a public lecture in your square without sales. Knowledge free, commerce later, if allowed. Mayor Rook weighed him like flour. No sales tonight, none. You may lecture under oversight. Sheriff Hart will attend. If you set out so much as a bottle within reach, your wagon belongs to Ironwood. Grift smiled like a man who had just been handed a dare. Madam Mayor, you have my word, which is more portable than my bottles. 8 o'clock, Hart said, and you'll keep your stage small. I will keep it precisely the size of your patience, Grift said. Then it will be small, Hart replied. Grift left with a stamped sheet that announced he could speak but not sell, breathe but not prosper. He touched the ink with a finger as if testing the temperature of law. Very well, he told his horse. We shall sell nothing and change minds. The latter is more profitable when the former is forbidden. The horse flicked an ear in a language that said, We have been here before. At 8 sharp, Ironwood had arranged itself in the square as if for a photograph. The men were not lounging, they were standing. The women were not hovering, they were assessing. A handful of boys had the air of scholars about to heckle politely. Schoolteacher Mrs. March stood with arms crossed. Sheriff Hart stood with his hat brim low enough to measure sincerity. Mayor Rook took a seat like a verdict. Grift did not fling open the wagon like a carnival. He stepped onto a modest crate, holding a slate and a piece of chalk, his bottle stowed deep and quiet. The wind made no effort to help him, which suited the demonstration of moderation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began in a tone a notch lower than usual, "Ironwood is the sort of town a man admires before he understands why. Order, work, law. I present myself as a servant of those things, not a miracle monger, a mechanic." "Of what?" a man called. "Of hope," Grift said, then lifted the chalk. "Also of the liver." Polite laughter, the kind people use when they are trying not to be won. He sketched a simplified body, this time less potato, more geometry. He labeled organs like a careful boy: liver, stomach, heart. No arrows, no occult squiggles. "We used to talk about humors," he said. "Black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, blood. Then we discovered tubes, tides, and how pipes clog. What matters to you is function. If the stomach rebels, the day rebels. If the joints stiffen, the mood stiffens." "Citations," Mrs. March said, voice clear as chalk on slate. "Experience," Grift said. "And Omaha. But here is something better than citations. Demonstration with no purchase." He pulled a small satchel from his coat. From it, he produced 3 items: a sprig of peppermint, a packet of powdered ginger, and a folded strip of blue litmus paper. He held them up as if the night required proof of small things. "You bring us candy and paper," Hart observed dryly. "We have both already." "And yet," Grift said. "Watch." He turned to a barrel by the pump. "What is Ironwood's water?" he asked. "Pure," Hart said. "We check it. Then we shall check it again." Not to insult, only to flatter. He dipped the litmus, watched it hold its blue like a stoic. "As I thought. Pure. Better water than half the towns I've taught to boil." He handed the strip to Mrs. March, who examined it with a scientist's wariness and a schoolteacher's hunger. "For a sour stomach," Grift continued, "ginger. It does not argue with the stomach. It tells the stomach a story it recognizes. For a nervous thought, peppermint. It instructs the head to breathe. These are common sense supports, cheaper than foolishness. If you never buy a bottle of anything from me, you may still remember this." The crowd did not shift into admiration, but it did shift. Suspicion likes it when a stranger says something it already believes. A woman in a shawl, Mrs. Harker, raised a hand half an inch. "I got a child with wind in the belly," she said, surrendering no dignity. "Ginger helps? If the child is old enough to complain, old enough for a grain. A pinch in warm water," Grift said. "If the child is too young to complain, do nothing but wait and walk them." Sometimes the cure is time with company. A pause. Mrs. Harker dimpled briefly, almost a smile, and nodded. "Now," Grift said, gesturing to the crowd, "a volunteer. I will not dose you. I will coach you." An old man with the posture of a used chair stepped up. Mr. Abner Pike, foreman of the mill. The name Pike set a bell ringing in Grift's mind, scowling miner in Silver Creek. But this Pike was different. Tidy, creased, probably filed alphabetically at night. "What ails you, Mr. Pike?" Grift asked. "Knees." "Mornings," Pike said. "They creak like old doors." Grift did not produce a bottle. He offered Pike the crate. "Sit. Now stand slowly. Breathe. Push the knees out a touch when you stand. It tricks them into behaving." Again, he watched the old man rise, slow and careful. Again. Third time the knees protested less out of habit. "Trickery," Pike said, and the word was not unkind. "Everything that works looks like trickery to a man who wants thunder," Grift said. "But we are humble people tonight. We will accept a hinge that squeaks less." There were no gasps, no hysteria, no fireworks. That was the point. He treated Ironwood's vanity, not to be dazzled. "Will you be selling tonight?" Mayor Rook asked, making official what the sign had already implied. "I will be refusing to sell," Grift said. "A lecture is a lecture. Tomorrow, if the council grants a permit, I might allow a few bottles for those who insist on being impatient." Mrs. March's mouth pursed and almost smiled. Hart's face did not change, but his hand left his revolver. People's shoulders lowered. Two men nodded to each other with an expression that meant he's at least not trying to steal the flower. Grift finished early. Ironwood, I thank you. You are not gullible. You are difficult, as a good lock is. I like locks. He stepped down from the crate, bowed to the mayor, and left. Leaving when people want more is the first rule of appetite. He returned to the prospector's room he'd taken above the ironmonger's shop, opened his ledger, and wrote, Day 8/9. Ironwood is a wall. Approach with a ladder, not a ram. No bottles, no banner. Peppermint and posture. Win the school teacher. Make the sheriff bored. Find the person the town believes without thinking. He tapped the pencil against the margin until an idea knocked back. Find the paper. Ironwood's newspaper was a single sheet printed thrice weekly and named with disarming ambition, the Ironwood Clarion. Its editor, Mr. Tobias Quill, had ink on his fingers, tobacco in his pocket, and the sort of sardonic eyebrows that turned commas into cross-examinations. Quill liked truth, but he adored copy. You the lecture fellow, Quill said, squinting through printer's fog as Grift entered the cramped office. I am a servant of digestion and domestic serenity, Grift said. Then the town owes you a statue already, Quill replied. What do you want? Only to be quoted accurately when I am misunderstood, Grift said. He placed a neat essay on Quill's clutter. On the Republic Within, modest counsel for stomachs, joints, and temper. Quill read a line aloud. Treat your wife as you would a nervous horse, and your husband as you would a sleepwalking child. You'll make enemies and readers both. He flipped pages. His eyebrows relaxed their sarcasm into interest. You don't promise miracles. I promise work, Griff said, and a bottle to help on the worst days, if the town permits it. You want the permit? Quill said. Write me a Q&A. I'll print it. Mayor reads me before she prays. Does she pray? Grift asked. Not if she's read me, Quill said. Grift wrote, How to boil water without boiling a marriage. How to stand from a chair without cursing God. How to avoid the barber's gossip while getting your hair cut. He did not write a word about prices, labels, or cures. He did include one sentence that would do more work than 10 sermons. If you cannot afford my bottle, you can still afford my advice, which costs attention. The Clarion came out before noon. Ironwood read it like a weather report. Mrs. March nodded in 3 places and underlined 2. Mayor Rook read it twice, once with impatience, once with reluctant approval. Sheriff Hart read the lines about posture out loud to his deputy and then stood up slowly, discovering his knees did, in fact, respond to trickery. At the afternoon council session, the permit came up. Mayor Rook. He asks to sell a bottled cordial under limited circumstances. Mrs. March. He has given advice free and sold nothing without leave. Sheriff Hart. He's annoying, but he ain't tried to bolt. Penrith. Clerk. We can license for a day, cap the price, and require a label. If he deviates, seize his wagon. Rook tapped her pencil, an executioner deciding on the height of the scaffold. 1 day, she said. Price $2. Labels to list, ginger, spirit, sugar, water, and other cordial herbs. No claims of cure, no fireworks. Sheriff present. She glanced to the side, then added, almost as an afterthought, and no exploiting the afflicted. At that cue, the door to the chamber opened, and Ironwood's unspoken sovereign entered, Mrs. Ada Lacey, matriarch of the Lacey Foundry, donor to the school, furnace of opinion. She was pale beneath good color today, moving slowly beneath excellent posture. Mayor, forgive me, Mrs. Lacey said, pressing gloved fingers to her temple. 1 minute of your session, this head will kill me before the foundry fumes do. Mrs. March started toward her. Hart stood. Lacey waved them back. It is nothing but the migraines that attend me. Worse in the damp. I'll live. I only came for the school donation. Grift did not move forward. He did not pounce. He did not hold up a bottle. He did a more dangerous thing. He waited until Mayor Rook sighed. Doctor, if that is your name, can you do anything that does not involve payment? Grift inclined his head. Perhaps. If Mrs. Lacey will permit me 5 minutes of unromantic technique. Mrs. Lacey, who commanded furnaces and opinions, nodded once. If it involves no promises, she said. No promises, only procedures. They adjourned to the side room, which smelled of lemon oil and budgets. Grift requested the simplest tools: a chair near a window, a basin of cool water, a cloth, a sprig of peppermint if the clerk could be bullied into finding it. He could. And silence. "Sit, Mrs. Lacey," he said, voice softened to the tone one uses with skittish horses and men carrying loaded guilt. "Light bothers?" "Like knives," she said. "Then we give the knives nothing to cut." He turned the chair away from the window and dimmed the curtain. He wet the cloth, wrung it with a precision a jeweler would envy, and laid it across her brow. "Breathe rather than think. Pretend your head is a stubborn man you do not intend to marry. Ignore it. It will follow." A brief silence. The counsel peered in as if spying on diplomacy. Hart stood like an umbrella near a storm. "Now," Grift said, "we press here." He set his fingers lightly at her temples, then the base of the skull. "Not hard. Firm. If pain were a thief, we are closing windows. It can stay, but it must be bored." Mrs. Lacey made a sound that wasn't a word and wasn't a protest. He counted breaths with her. He offered a pinch of peppermint under her nose. He changed the cloth. He did nothing miraculous for 5 whole minutes. In the 5th minute, her shoulders lowered 3/4 inches, which is the largest unit by which true relief is measured. "Well," she said softly, almost surprised into gratitude. "It has stepped back." "Good," Grift said, and stepped back as if the room were holy. "It will return, because it is a creature of habit. When it does, appoint someone to repeat this. Let the peppermint sit. Avoid flour at supper. Tell your foreman to cover the east vents on damp nights. Your head is a barometer. Treat it as one." Mrs. Lacey stood, careful, measuring the room as if it were new territory. "You may sell," she told the mayor, who had not asked her but frequently found that questions she hadn't asked were answered anyway. "Within the limits you already named." Mayor Rooks sniffed. "We had decided so," she lied graciously. Hart's mouth twitched. Mrs. March's glasses caught a glint of satisfaction. Quill, who had materialized in the doorway with a notebook as if conjured by the scent of copy, wrote, "Peppermint, not promises," in quick strokes. Grift bowed to Mrs. Lacey with a respect he rarely paid cash. "Madam, you carried your own cure in your posture. I merely organized it." "Sir," she said, "you have the soul of a thief and the hands of a nurse." She paused. "I recommend you keep both." "Daily," Grift said, "the market that didn't want to be one." By late afternoon, Ironwood Square had grudgingly become a marketplace, not the rollicking bazaar of Dustwood, nor the velvet opera crush of Silver Creek. This was a queue, a narrow, moral line of citizens armed with coin and conditions. Sheriff Hart stood 5 paces from the wagon, arms folded, eyes balanced between boredom and readiness. Mayor Rook observed from a chair that could have been a throne. Mrs. March had a notebook for notes, not names. Quill perched with pen lifted like a small sword. Grift had arranged his stage to look like a counter rather than a theater. A chalkboard read, "Limits of the bottle. 2 spoonfuls morning and night. Not for children, drunkards, or show-offs. Does not cure stupidity. Does not replace sleep, water, or apologies." People smiled against their own will. Another board read, in neat hand, "Price, $2. Ingredients, water, grain spirit, ginger, molasses, cordial herbs. Claims, ease of tension, stomach, temper. Not a cure for bullets, taxes, marriage without conversation." "Clever," Mrs. March murmured. "If you must sell, sell truth adjacent." First in line was Mrs. Harker with her child on a hip. "Not for him," she said before Grift could offer. "For me. He don't sleep. I don't sleep. Maybe this helps me not punch the wall." "It will not make the child sleep," Grift said. "It may remind you that you are a person. Take it with a walk. If the walk fails, take it with another woman who understands." He slid a bottle forward. She slid $2 across, her eyes saying agreement where life said compromise. Mr. Pike of the mill bought one with the grim seriousness of a man purchasing a new gear. "For nights," he said. "Mornings I have taught." "Good," Grift said. "Evenings hate being bored. Give them routine." A farmhand approached with the cautious pride of someone spending on himself for once. "For my ma. She says her hands burn." Rub a little on the joints if you like the smell, Grift said. But mostly, warm water and a clean cloth. This is drink, not ointment. You telling me how to not use the thing you're selling me? The hand asked, half laughing. Yes, Grift said simply. It keeps me out of jail. Laughter pricked the air. Sheriff Hart smothered something that might have been a chuckle. Then the barber came, no longer spoiling for war, but unable to abandon his vocation. If this turns my hairline around, I'll print you a medal, he grumped. I sell for joints and disposition, Grift said. I repair neither vanity nor destiny. Disposition it is. The barber sighed and paid. The line moved. The town bought not hysteria, but hedges. A bottle for the cupboard, a bottle for the mother-in-law, a bottle for the night before the audit. No one gulped, no one swooned. The stooge, unnecessary today, sat on the wagon step, eyes wide, witnessing a miracle stranger to him, a sale that looked like sense. Halfway through, Mrs. Lacey's footman appeared, purchased 4 bottles for the staff with a note in her hand. For headaches, cloth and quiet first. Elixir if necessary, peppermint always. Quill leaned over his notebook and wrote, Headache Regimen, Lady Lacey style, because news is what the important own and the rest admire. As the last bottles went to a trio of seamstresses who split the cost and the hope between them, Sheriff Hart stepped forward. He picked up an unopened bottle, squinted, and said, $2 seems fair. Sheriff, Grift said, if you think it too high, pay one and return the other in sarcasm. Hart examined him for fraud and found performance instead, which, on balance, Ironwood tolerated under supervision. He set $2 on the plank. For my deputy, he said, 1 spoon when he wakes, and I'll do the listening. Listening works faster than ginger, Grift said, but both together will make a decent morning. Hart tucked the bottle away. You leaving tonight? Tomorrow at dawn, Grift said. This town deserves a man who keeps a promise by staying long enough to become boring. I am nearly there. Good, Hart said, which in Ironwood was a testimonial. Mayor Rook rose, gathered the day with her glance, and approached the wagon like a sparrow who had successfully managed a flock of hawks. Doctor, she said, using the title like a loan she might call in, you have obeyed. You have not embarrassed me. You have, to my surprise, not embarrassed yourself. You will leave a copy of your label with Mr. Penrith. I will leave 2, Grift said, and wrote them out again by hand, for there was a theatricality even in bureaucratic kindness. Mrs. March came last, laying $2 down with a teacher's dignity and a woman's private calculus. For nights before examinations, she said, and for certain committee meetings. Apply to the ear when the committee speaks, Grift said, externally. Her smile flashed a rare, bright thing, the sort schools only see on field day. You are intolerable, she said, and yet serviceable, which is the best a man like me can hope to be, he said. Exit, with permit and peppermint. At dusk, Ironwood folded up its commerce and ironed it for tomorrow. Grift packed the wagon slowly, not to give anyone the impression of flight. Sheriff Hart lingered, because lingering is how law ends well. Quill tipped his hat with ink-stained fingers. Mrs. March nodded once more from the curb, having already put the bottle somewhere sensible in her home. Mayor Rook did not wave. She permitted sun and moon to perform their duties without applause. Mrs. Lacey's carriage rolled past, lanterns steady. From inside, a gloved hand flicked the tiniest salute of acknowledgement. It meant more than a testimonial and less than a friendship, exactly the station Grift preferred with those who could buy towns. He climbed into the wagon seat, placed both hands on the reins, and, before he clucked the horse into movement, took out his ledger. Day 10. Permit obtained. Rules obeyed. Bottles sold under price cap. No fireworks, no collapse, no mob. Sheriff bought one. School teacher bought one. Matriarch's head bent, then yielded. Paper, printed advice. I am not beloved. I am tolerated. He underlined tolerated. Some towns dream aloud and pay in a roar. Others pay in silence and take more convincing to speak well of you. Both spend, he added in smaller hand as if confessing to the horse. Ironwood taught me a language, modesty. It tastes like peppermint and reads like a town charter. The horse flicked its tail, which in equine rhetoric means you could have learned that earlier. Grift laughed, a quiet, honest sound that surprised the evening. At dawn, he rolled out. No chase thundered after him. No bullet stitched the dust. Sheriff Hart's silhouette stood at the town's edge, long enough to be seen and forgotten. The signboard that had threatened him into honesty nodded him past with its silent consonants. Beyond Ironwood, the road stretched west and south into landscapes without permits, into counties where gossip ran faster than law, and the horizon was a bright, gullible mouth. Dr. Bartholomew Percival Grift tipped his hat to the distance. "Onward, doctor," he told himself, and, because he had learned a useful trick, added under his breath, "and downward with the fireworks." The wagon creaked its agreement. The day opened like a hand. Somewhere out ahead, a mule would be waiting to develop sudden intelligence, a mayor's knee to forget to ache, a barber to drink and scowl, a paper to be fed, and a town to be persuaded that improvement came in bottles, advice, and the theatrical arrangement of both. And the republic within, pipes, pumps, pride, panic, peppermint, marched with him, as faithful as his shadow.